So Dan Jenkins at SteelCamel.com has sent me some super absorbent packs to evaluate. And these are designed to be put into electrical boxes or places where you definitely don't want moisture causing any problems with, conducting power across things or anything like that. They make larger sizes for larger volumes, but one of these little 1" by 2" packets is designed for a 1 to 2 cubic foot area. So I'm going to be testing them in these mason jars. Now they also make a kind of a filter pack that absorbs water from air, like in air compressor systems, and they sent me some samples of that, what it looks like. So unlike desiccant beads, this stuff here absorbs water and grows out when it absorbs the water, and so it gets larger and it will actually kind of limit your airflow. So when it's time to replace them, you'll know because the air pressure starts going down because it's harder to get air through the filter. So it grows, and when you see it swell up, you'll know it's time to replace them. Now with desiccant beads, you can heat them and refresh them. They just say, you're going to take these and replace them when they grow. Now that might be an advantage in that if you heat them, the water won't come back out of them. So the test they suggest is, put these in a windowsill where they get heated by the sun, and it might absorb water, but then when you heat it up, the water will come back into the jars. And so the claim is these guys won't have that happen. So in the sample pack, they gave me a cup to put water in, a little pouch that says, hey, this white powder is the active ingredient. To see work, add it to the cup of water. So this reminds me very much of a magic trick where there's powder and you put it in water and it sucks all the water up and solidifies the water. So I suspect it's a very similar reaction here. So let's add a little to the water. So you can see it's kind of growing in there. And so it's absorbing the water, and now this guy is kind of solidified, and you can see the water isn't going anywhere. So it traps the water into a gel form. So I'm going to be evaluating their SteelCamel super absorbing powder against standard, color changing indicating desiccant beads and some flour drying silica crystals. And to keep this fair, we need to do this kind of by equal weight. All right, so I want an equal weight in each of these bell jars of desiccant. All right, it says tear open foil, but there wasn't a notch to start the tear, so I got a pair of scissors and that starts the tear. So in the 1" by 2" bag, you get this guy. It looks like a piece of cloth serged on 3 sides, and it definitely feels like it has powder inside. So we're going to weigh this guy. So it looks like 4.3 grams. So I'm going to attempt to get about 4.3 grams of desiccant beads in this lid here. Alright, I have 4.27. I figured that's about enough, especially considering this guy has some, cloth that's making up some of that weight. Alright, and now we have the flour drying crystals, which is basically desiccant in crystal form instead of bead form. Alright, we're at 4.33 grams on that. Don't ask me how I got these in the bottom of the jars without spilling any, but I did it. So now I'm going to put 2 milliliters of water in each glass jar. Not in the lids, but outside of the lids. All right, I have these out in my sunroom, which is normally warmer than the house. It's not getting direct sunlight now, but there's certain portions of the day when it does. 2 milliliters of water really isn't that much. You can kind of see just a little bit of water there in the bottom of the jars. And if all that water disappears and there's no condensation, I might add the same amount to all 3 jars at a different time. So we'll come back and check them in a day. So normal silica desiccant, if you leave them out in the sun on a hot day, a dry day, you can recharge them, basically drive all the water out with the heat of the sun, and then reuse them. So I've taken the active ingredient here that I absorbed some water with, and I'm putting it out in a hot sunny day, and I basically want to see, does it drive all the water out and turn this back into powder, or is it something where it's a one-time, it grabs the water, holds it, and never lets go? Alright, all these guys are outside on the patio for about 6 hours, and you can see they've all turned orange. They go green when they're wet, and they turn orange when they're dry. Now this cup had a lot more liquid in it than these guys had absorbed. And it looks like the level of liquid might have gone down a little bit, but it's still mostly gel. So I'm going to set it out for another day if we have another dry day tomorrow. It's nice and warm in my hand from the sun. But it hasn't driven all the liquid out in one day. But then if you had a cup full of water out there, it probably wouldn't evaporate a full cup of water in a day either. Alright, it's looking like another hot, sunny, and dry day. And I found another desiccant packet that needs to be reset. So I'm leaving that out there, and this will be leaving out for the 2nd day in a row. It looks like maybe the gel volume has gone down slightly, so I think some of the water is evaporating, but it's not going fast. Alright, these guys have been out here for a day now. I have not been able to tell if the SteelCamel stuff has swollen at all. It's kind of folded into that cap, and I don't notice any swelling, though. I think that's just the folding. And most of the water is gone. There's just a little sheen mostly trapped underneath the lid. So I think it's the stuff that was kind of not exposed to the air because it was under the lid. There's just a little bit in there. Now, desiccant beads have turned the color here, so they've turned pink, so that means they've absorbed moisture. They're not completely pink, but they're definitely, getting to that point where you normally recharge them. And there is a little bit of liquid underneath there, just a tiny bit. I think it's mostly the liquid that is protected from evaporation by the plastic lid sitting on top of it. So some liquid has definitely evaporated and been absorbed in all cases. Now this is desiccant powder. It's normally used for flour drying. It's hard to work with because it's so small. It's hard to put in a case, so the beads are generally preferred. And there is a very small amount of water visible underneath that lid, but not as much as in the other two. So I think the desiccant powder has actually absorbed more of the moisture out of the jar. Now I haven't seen any moisture condensing inside the jars yet. They only get sun in the morning and afternoon, not kind of during the heat of the day. So I'm going to leave them another day, see if we can completely dry out the 2 milliliters of water that started off in the bottom of these guys. Alright, so these guys have turned orange. This has definitely gone down, so we are definitely losing water volume. But it's taking multiple days here. I'll put it out again tomorrow. Alright, this was out for another day in the sun, and it definitely has lost volume there. It's definitely lower than it was before. Alright, it's been 4 days, and each of these plastic lids is kind of trapping a little tiny bit of water underneath it. But the various desiccants have absorbed all the water that's kind of outside of the base of the plastic lid. So I am going to put another 2 milliliters of water in the base of each of these. Now if you look at the interior surfaces, that one's completely dry. The desiccant sand here is dry. Now the desiccant beads, they've turned pink, and there does appear to be tiny little drops of condensation inside there. So it looks like maybe when these guys are getting heated up, some of that water is coming out and condensating on the outside, which I'm not seeing with the kind of desiccant sand or the SteelCamel. Open these guys up to put a little more water in, just feeling with my finger. These two are dry. there is definite slight dampness there. I'm not sure if you can see where my finger drew a line in the condensation, but there's definitely condensation there on the sidewalls that I could pull off and get my finger a little bit down. All right, I have dripped down the side so it doesn't get into the little plastic lids another 2 milliliters of water, and so you can kind of see there it is in the jars. So we again have liquid water in the base of all three jars, in addition to the tiny little bits trapped underneath the kind of convex surface of the lids there. Alright, it's been another hot, dry, and windy day, and we are definitely driving water out of this. The volume has gone down significantly. It's not turning right directly back to the white powder. At the top edge here, I'm seeing kind of white powderish residue type stuff, but it's still kind of jelly consistency, or kind of a gel at the bottom there, and it has a kind of a brownish tint. So, I guess I'll keep doing this as long as the weather cooperates. Okay, it's been a day since I added an additional 2 milliliters of water to these jars. So that's a total of 4 milliliters to each of the jars. And there is a little bit of water still inside of this jar here. There's liquid water inside of that jar. And there's also liquid water inside of this jar. So both of the jars that have desiccant, either the flower drying crystals, which have turned kind of from a yellowish to a greenish color, or the desiccant beads, which turn from the blue to the pink indicating, they both have visible condensation inside the jar here, which isn't surprising since there's liquid still in the bottom. However, the SteelCamel jar, although it has liquid on the bottom, doesn't have any visible condensation inside the jar. So it looks like the humidity level inside the jar is low enough to prevent condensation. It's probably going to take a couple more days to transfer all of that water by evaporation and being sucked into this stuff out of the jar. But it definitely does look like an equal weight of SteelCamel product will absorb more water than the desiccant beads or the desiccant kind of powder. Alright, that's another day, and this stuff is getting definitely kind of dried out here. The center bit there is still gummy. So it's not turning back into a white powder. It's kind of, I think, the water mixed polymer chains, and even when we push all the water out, those chains kind of stay connected to each other. Alright, we have a total of 4 milliliters of water in each of these jars. It is clear that the silica beads here are fully saturated. They're not absorbing any more water, and we have condensation. The silica powder here, also there's water dripping around the bottom of the jar, and it is, there's condensation in the jar there. Now, SteelCamel stuff has absorbed all of the water except the little bit that's trapped underneath the plastic lid there, and it's kept the humidity inside such that there's no condensation inside the jar. So I think it's very fair to say that on a per weight basis, even including the weight of the packaging there, this guy definitely absorbs more water per weight than the silica gel, either pellets or the powder form of it. So at this point, by weight comparison, it's definitely winning. I guess at this point I'm kind of interested in seeing how much more water can it absorb. So with these guys, I think, they did okay with 2 milliliters, but there was still a little bit of condensation. They definitely are not working at 4 milliliters. So I'm going to pop this guy up to 8 milliliters. It's handled 4. We're going to put another 4 in there and see what it does with 8 milliliters of water. There's been no change in the desiccant gel because I didn't add any more water to it. Here there is still water in the base. It doesn't look like there's much condensation inside here. There's a little tiny bit right there. There's a little bit of condensation there. Nothing compared to the desiccant packs here. The desiccant beads or the desiccant powder. So it might be that maybe we've hit the maximum this amount of the SteelCamel material can absorb. However, it doesn't really look like it's super bad, so I'm going to give it a couple more days to absorb the rest of that water that I put in there. Or I let this sit out for probably 4 or 5 more days. I lost track of exactly how many days, but enough so that it's at equilibrium at this point. So of the 8 milliliters of water in there, there's still a little bit at the bottom. It did not absorb it all. The other two had condensation, just kind of sticks around. They only had 4 milliliters of water, and there's still water left there. They're completely saturated as well. So we've already seen, this guy absorbs more water. Now, it's at least twice as much. It may not be as 4 times as much. I want to see the size of the pouch here. So you can see here that, yes, it is definitely swollen up. It's much thicker than it was when I put it in. So, I believe it's pretty much used up at this point. All right, I'm going to just open this up to take a look inside. I suspect it's going to look very much like what was in that cup. So you can see there's the powder, and it is not formed a mass like in the cup where I poured it directly into water. It's like each flake has gotten bigger. So it's kind of like a sticky rice consistency here. But it's definitely a lot more than was in there before, so it's absorbing a lot of liquid. All right, so I think it's safe to say this stuff definitely absorbs more liquid than a desiccant gel of the same weight. It also traps the liquid, so once it absorbs it, even if it gets hot, it doesn't let it go very easily. So that cuts down on the condensation that might come back out if you're in a hot environment. So there's certain differences in how it traps the water and how hard it holds onto the water. That does mean it's not reusable. You go through this process, and then when it's used up, you throw it out and buy another one. So depending on your application, this may be a better solution than just desiccant beads.